about their investigation into the deaths of the actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa. They say he died from heart disease after his wife passed away from a rare infectious illness. There is a tunnel beneath Gene Hackman's mansion. It is 312 feet deep. The FBI found it, and what was waiting at the bottom has not been fully reported anywhere. When federal investigators arrived at Hackman's Santa Fe estate on February 26, 2025, they came for a routine death call. 2 elderly people, natural causes, paperwork. But inside the private library, hidden behind mahogany paneling that looked identical to every other wall in the room, they found a concealed passage, stone steps descending into darkness, cold air rising from somewhere far below. And the deeper they went, the less routine any of this became. 47 crates, a ledger written in German, dated 1947. Photographs with faces deliberately cut out, symbols covering the chamber walls that match no known language on Earth. And at the far end, an 8-foot iron door sealed with airflow coming from the other side. The FBI still hasn't opened it. Here is everything they found. The fortress. The FBI wasn't supposed to find a tunnel. They showed up at Hackman's Santa Fe mansion on February 26, 2025 to process the deaths of an elderly couple. Front door open, scattered pills on the bathroom countertop, 1 dog dead in a closet, 2 more alive on the property. Betsy Arakawa had died weeks earlier around February 3rd. Her body undiscovered until investigators found both of them together that February morning. Tonight, new body camera video revealing the moments after actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy were found dead in their Santa Fe home last month. Gene's cause of death was listed as cardiovascular disease complicated by Alzheimer's. Routine, tragic, closed. Except the estate Gene Hackman built in the New Mexico desert was not the home of a man who expected to be found. Richard Castagnano has spent 20 years consulting on security for celebrities, diplomats, and Fortune 500 executives. He's walked through embassies and the private compounds of people who pay to stay unknown. When he reviewed the Hackman property systems for a 2019 insurance assessment, he stopped his team and told them to check the paperwork. Twice. He sat very still when he described what he'd found. "I've worked on embassies," he said. "I've consulted for defense contractors." This estate had infrastructure that would make some of them jealous. Military-grade paranoia translated into residential architecture. 23 acres of dense forest, 12-foot stone walls around the entire perimeter, reinforced steel gates, motion sensors, thermal cameras, the kind of surveillance grid you'd expect around a government facility, not a retired actor's home. Staff were handpicked, vetted, and bound by ironclad NDAs. Anyone who worked on that property was forbidden from discussing what they saw, what they heard, or what they were asked to build. This was such a mystery for investigators. We have now received a trove of new information. It includes details on what Betsy Hackman was searching for before she died, and the first-person view of the officers as they found the couple dead at home. And get this, that level of security wasn't what raised red flags. What raised red flags was what the contractors remembered. Miguel Reyes is not a man who frightens easily. He's done foundation work in Santa Fe for 30 years. Basements, adobe retrofits, commercial pours. But when we reached him at his workshop, he was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. The silence of someone carrying something heavy. "They wanted concrete walls 18 in thick in certain sections of the basement," he said finally. "That's bunker-level construction." He looked down at his hands. I asked what it was for. They said storage. A pause. "But you don't build storage like you're expecting a bomb." Reyes was paid triple his normal rate. He signed an NDA prohibiting him from discussing the work for 20 years. That NDA expired in 2024, 1 year before Hackman's death. When investigators finally asked him to describe the full scope of what he'd built, he said he couldn't because he'd only worked on one section. There were other contractors, specialists brought in for the deeper levels. Levels that Reyes was told, flatly, never existed. Here's the catch. Whatever those deeper levels were, the FBI was now standing directly above them. If you want to know what investigators found when they followed this underground, make sure you're subscribed right now, because this is the part nobody else is reporting. The Discovery doctor Patricia Okonkwo had spent 22 years photographing the worst things human beings do to each other. Cartel executions, mass graves, crime scenes that gave veteran agents nightmares. She walked into Hackman's mansion on February 26th as part of the initial FBI response team, expecting sadness. An elderly couple, natural causes, closed the file. She wasn't prepared for a single detail. Something felt wrong immediately, she said, hands folded on the table, composed in the way of someone who learned composure as a survival skill. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't the grandeur. It was the details that didn't add up. Furniture had been moved recently. You could see the impressions in the carpet, where pieces had stood for years. Scuff marks on the hardwood floors didn't match the couple's limited mobility. Personal documents in Hackman's study had been rifled through and hastily reorganized. Someone had been searching for something specific, or Hackman himself, in his final days, had been hiding it. But here's what nobody is saying out loud. The scene didn't match two elderly people dying quietly, not even close. Then Okonkwo found the library. She ran her palm along the mahogany paneling, checking for hidden compartments. Standard procedure in high-value estates. Her hand stopped. A section of wall, approximately 4 feet wide, resonated differently when she tapped it. Hollow. Behind the panel, concealed so perfectly it would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look, was a narrow passageway. Stone steps worn smooth by what appeared to be decades of use, spiraling downward into absolute darkness. The air rising from below was cold, damp. One agent described the smell as like opening a tomb that hadn't been disturbed in centuries. But here's what stopped everyone cold. The tunnel wasn't just old. Certain sections had been reinforced with modern concrete. Fresh electrical conduits ran along the walls. Someone had been maintaining this passage recently. The tunnel measured roughly 36 in wide and descended at a steep angle. Original stonework dating back nearly a century, engineered to last forever. Okonkwo stood at the top of those stairs for a full minute before descending. "I've been in situations where my instincts told me to leave," she said. Her voice, which had been even throughout the entire conversation, dropped half a register. Crime scenes where the danger was obvious. This was different. The danger wasn't obvious, but my body knew something my mind didn't. She went down anyway. And what the FBI found at the bottom, that's what changed the entire. Investigation into the darkness. The descent took nearly 15 minutes. 312 feet below the library floor, the staircase opened into a chamber. It measured approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, with ceilings arched in a style that local historian Dr. Elena Vasquez identified as consistent with Spanish colonial architecture from the late 1800s. Vasquez speaks in careful, measured sentences. Someone who built her career on precision. But she hadn't slept well since she started researching this property, and it showed. She leaned forward when she described what her records revealed. The property changed hands 7 times between 1920 and 1965. Each transaction was deliberately structured to obscure the buyer's identity. Shell companies, anonymous trusts, deliberately vague documentation. She pressed her fingertips together. That's not normal real estate activity. That's the kind of paper trail you create when you're hiding something important, or someone. And get this, between 1945 and 1950, 3 separate property surveys of this land were commissioned. All 3 surveyors submitted incomplete reports. 2 left New Mexico within months of beginning their work. The 3rd died in a car accident 6 weeks after his final visit to the property. Now, the FBI was standing inside a chamber those surveyors never finished documenting. The room was filled with wooden crates stacked against every wall. 47 in total, according to the initial federal inventory. Some were intact. Others had crumbled with age, their contents spilling across the stone floor. Dust covered everything, the kind that takes decades to accumulate. But here's the catch. In certain spots near the crates, the dust had been disturbed recently. Someone had been inside this chamber, and it wasn't the FBI. Inside one crate, a leather-bound ledger dated 1947. Every page filled with names, dates, and financial figures. All of it written in German. Another crate held 63 photographs, fragile, yellowed. Men in military uniforms that matched no recognized armed force from any known nation. Some images showed meetings in dimly lit rooms. Others depicted locations researchers still haven't been able to identify. Several showed individuals whose names had been deliberately scratched out of history. One photograph stopped every agent in the room. It showed a group of men standing in front of what appeared to be the very entrance to this tunnel, taken in the 1946 based on the clothing and image quality. 2 faces had been carefully cut out of the photograph. Someone didn't want these men identified, ever. But the photographs weren't the worst thing the FBI found in that chamber. Not even close. The symbols. When Dr. Okongu's flashlight swept across the far wall, she dropped her camera. The walls were covered in markings, hundreds of them. Not scratched or scrolled, carved with precision, with intent. They didn't match any known language or writing system on Earth. She photographed over 300 individual symbols during the initial documentation. Her hands were shaking. In 22 years, she had never had that reaction to evidence. I couldn't look at them for more than 30 seconds at a time, she said. A long silence. Then, I've seen things that would break most people, but those symbols made me feel like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. Nobody spoke for a while after that. Some symbols resembled ancient alchemical signs from medieval Europe. Others looked like technical schematics, blueprints for mechanisms that appeared far too advanced for the 1800s. And then, there were the ones that matched astronomical charts. Dr. Marcus Webb, an astrophysicist who later examined the photographs, spent 3 weeks on the analysis. He chose his words carefully. If these charts represent real stellar positions, they would correspond to a date approximately 12,000 years in the past. He paused. Or potentially, and this is where it gets deeply unsettling, 12,000 years in the future. The mathematical precision is remarkable. Whoever created these wasn't guessing. They understood orbital mechanics at a level that would have been impossible in the 1800s. And get this, 3 theories have emerged. First, an eccentric previous owner, an amateur occultist with money and time. Second, coded messages designed to be deciphered only with the right key. Third, the one that keeps researchers awake at 3 a.m., These symbols represent knowledge never meant to be found. Information passed through generations of secret keepers who understood something about this world the rest of us were never meant to know. But here's what nobody is saying. The symbols weren't pointing backward. They were pointing towards something at the far end of the chamber. The arrangement wasn't random. The carvings near the floor clustered densely around the eastern wall, the same wall that faced the iron door. Researchers who've studied the photographs say it looks less like decoration and more like a warning or an instruction, something the FBI had not yet found. The door that shouldn't exist. At the far end of the vault, partially concealed behind a stack of deteriorating crates, federal agents found something that stopped the room. An iron door, 8 feet tall, 4 inches thick. Its surface was covered in rust and grime, clearly untouched for decades. No handle, only a heavy corroded lock mechanism that appeared engineered to keep something sealed away permanently. Not locked, sealed. One FBI agent, speaking anonymously, described the moment they pushed aside those crates and saw it. We'd seen the crates. We'd seen the symbols. A pause. But when we saw that door, everyone went quiet. His voice dropped. It wasn't just old. It felt old, like something that had been waiting down there before any of us were born. He hesitated. And there was this feeling. I know how it sounds, but there was this feeling that it didn't want to be opened. The door is still sealed today. No official explanation has been given for why authorities haven't attempted to open it. The FBI has refused to comment. Official statements are deliberately vague, worded with the careful precision of people who are very aware of what they're not saying. Here's the catch. Geological surveys of the surrounding area, conducted years before Hackman ever purchased the property, show anomalies in the subsurface terrain, hollow pockets extending hundreds of feet in multiple directions. This tunnel may not be a single passage. It may be a network. And then there's the thermal imaging result that no one expected. There is airflow on the other side of that door. Whatever space exists behind that iron barrier is not a dead end. It continues deeper underground. How deep? Nobody knows. The FBI won't say, and independent researchers haven't been allowed anywhere near it. Miguel Reyes remembers one conversation that still haunts him. He was sitting in his workshop, turning a wrench over and over in his hands when he said it. They asked me about blast-resistant doors once, industrial grade, the kind you'd see in government facilities. He set the wrench down. I told them I didn't do that kind of work. He swallowed hard. They said they'd find someone who did. The final weeks. The neighbors always knew something was different about the Hackman estate. Maria Sandoval had lived on the neighboring property for 15 years. She remembered a specific night around 2017, her dog barking, herself outside at 2 a.m. in the New Mexico cold, listening. There was this sound, she said, like heavy machinery, but muffled, coming from underground. She paused. It lasted maybe 20 minutes, then stopped. Her voice hardened. My husband thought I was imagining things. I know what I heard. Other neighbors reported the same, strange vibrations, trucks arriving in the middle of the night, power fluctuations originating from the Hackman property. One neighbor, unprompted, said they had seen Gene Hackman himself standing outside at 3 a.m. on multiple occasions in his final years, standing perfectly still, staring at a specific spot on his property, the same spot where investigators later discovered the tunnel entrance. And get this, former staff members who left the estate have essentially vanished from public life. Workers from decades past who cannot be located. Local researchers who began investigating the property's history and then simply stopped responding to inquiries. Nobody knows why, but here's what keeps investigators up at night. The connection between that underground chamber and the deaths of Gene and Betsy Hackman. Official cause of death, natural causes. The medical examiner confirmed cardiovascular disease with Alzheimer's as a contributing factor. But Betsy died around February 3rd, and her body wasn't discovered for over 3 weeks. Gene died sometime later, alone in that mansion, inside a property with a surveillance grid that rivals government installations. Security footage from external cameras, the only footage that survived because internal recordings were mysteriously corrupted, shows lights going on and off in different rooms during the weeks before his death was discovered. Someone was moving through that house for 3 weeks in a mansion with thermal cameras, motion sensors, and a surveillance system compared to a government facility. And none of it recorded a single frame. Did Gene discover something in the tunnel? Was he searching for something specific? Hiding something before it was too late? Some investigators believe the couple was silenced because they knew too much. Others believe the tunnel provided access for someone to enter the mansion completely undetected. And a few believe Hackman himself descended into that chamber one final time, and what he found there is what killed him. No one has explained the corrupted cameras. No one has explained how Betsy's death went unnoticed for 3 weeks on a monitored estate. And no one has explained why, in his final days, Gene Hackman appeared to be systematically reorganizing his personal documents, as if he knew exactly who was coming. What they don't want you to know. The investigation is ongoing. FBI forensic teams continue working through every artifact, every document, every symbol carved into those ancient walls. Dr. Vasquez has assembled a team of historians, cryptographers, and archaeologists to work through what little evidence has been made publicly available. "What we've found is just the tip of the iceberg," she said. Her voice was quiet. "The tunnel predates Hackman's ownership by at least 70 years. The question isn't just who built it. The question is, what was Gene Hackman's relationship to whatever secrets it contains, and whether he was the last person supposed to protect them?" Here's what nobody is saying out loud. Property transfer records show someone has already filed paperwork to purchase the estate. The buyer, an anonymous trust registered in the Cayman Islands. No names, no public filings, just a shell entity with enough capital to acquire one of the most restricted properties in the American Southwest, before investigators have finished processing the scene. They want access to that tunnel, and they're moving fast. Federal authorities have placed the property under restricted access. Journalists have been turned away at the perimeter. Every Freedom of Information request has been denied, every single one, on grounds of an ongoing investigation. But here's the catch. An ongoing investigation into what exactly? 2 elderly deaths ruled natural causes. Since when does that warrant federal classification? The iron door is still sealed. The 47 crates are in federal custody. The 63 photographs are under review. The German ledger, filled with names that they were supposed to have been erased from history, has not been publicly acknowledged by any agency. And the airflow behind that door, the space that continues deeper underground, past what thermal imaging can measure, nobody is talking about it. Gene Hackman wasn't hiding from fame. Investigative sources suggest he was a guardian of something buried long before he ever set foot on that property. Some researchers believe he purchased the estate specifically because he knew what was beneath it, that he spent decades keeping the wrong people away, and that in his final days, alone, the cameras dark, his wife already gone, he was doing it one last time. 312 feet below his library floor, the iron door is still sealed. The airflow on the other side is still moving. Something down there is still waiting. The question isn't whether what's behind that door is real. The evidence says it is. The question is what happens when it finally opens, and whether we'll be allowed to know. If you want to find out what's on the other side of that door, subscribe right now, because the moment that changes, you'll want to already be here. Drop your theory in the comments. What do you think the FBI found beyond that iron barrier? And why haven't they opened it?